Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina's hearing in docket number 2020-229-E. Dominion Energy South Carolina Incorporated's establishment of a solar choice metering tariff pursuant to South Carolina Code annotated section 58-40-20. It is 9:02 on Tuesday, March 2nd, and today we have one witness scheduled to testify and closing arguments by the parties. Let's take roll. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Powers, Commissioner Caston, Vice Chair Belzer, and Chairman Williams. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Williams and Commissioner Thomas. When we recessed for the evening yesterday, the next witness scheduled to be called was Witness Ori. Is Witness Ori ready and available? Okay. Ms. Pittman, would you please call Mr. Ori to the witness stand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, ORS calls Brian Ori to the stand.
Mr. Ori, if you would pause and allow the court reporter to swear you in.
Mr. Ori, if you would raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Ori, please state your name and occupation.
My name is Brian Horry, and I'm a senior partner with Energy and Environmental Economics.
Are you the same Brian Ori who pre-filed 32 pages of revised direct testimony with this commission in docket 2020-229E on February 5th, 2020?
Yes.
2021, actually, excuse me, 2021.
Yes.
This revised testimony was only revised to remove confidential designations from a previously filed version, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed revised direct testimony?
Nope.
If I asked you the same questions today as those posed in your pre-filed revised direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, ORS asks that the pre-filed revised direct testimony of Mr. Ori be read into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed revised direct testimony of Mr. Ori will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Ori, did you file as an attachment to your revised direct testimony 2 exhibits marked as BKH1 consisting of 7 pages and BKH2 consisting of 127 pages?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your exhibit?
No, I do not.
And Mr. Chairman, ORS asks that exhibits BKH1 and BKH2 be marked for identification and entered as the next composite hearing exhibit.
BKH1 and BKH2 will be marked as a composite exhibit and entered into the record as hearing exhibit 14.
Thank you. Mr. Ori, can you please give a brief description of your educational background and professional experience?
I have over 30 years of experience in the energy industry. My areas of expertise include avoided costs, utility rate making, cost effectiveness evaluations, transmission distribution planning, and distributed energy resources. Prior to joining E3, I was an expert witness for Pacific Gas and Electric Company on electricity rate making and cost allocation. I previously testified before this commission on behalf of ORS on issues related to avoided costs and NEM compensation for DEC, DEP, and Dominion.
Will you please tell us why you were retained by the Office of Regulatory Staff in this proceeding?
ORS retained E3 to conduct analysis, review, and develop recommendations regarding the solar choice tariffs proposed by Dominion.
Did you prepare a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Will you please present that to the Commission?
Good afternoon, or I should say good morning, Chairman Williams, Vice Chair Belzer, and members of the Commission. I reviewed the testimonies of Dominion and found that their proposed rates are effective at reducing the cost shift burden placed on other customers by customer generators. That said, the Dominion proposed rates can be modified to further reduce the cost shift to near zero over a wide range of solar installation sizes. My specific recommendations for modifications are: 1. The Dominion proposed subscription fee should be reduced to better align with cost causation, with remaining T&D revenue to be recovered through the increased TOU energy charges. 2. The Dominion proposed TOU energy charges should be modified to be calculated based on the energy that consumer generators are expected to purchase from Dominion rather than the energy that would have been consumed by the customer prior to the installation of solar. This modification will further reduce the cost shift inherent in Dominion's proposed rates. To demonstrate this, ORS provided modified rates for residential and small general service customer generators that reduce the cost shift to near zero over a wide range of solar installation sizes. 3. ORS also produced estimates of the cost to serve customer generators under an embedded cost of service framework. For this analysis, E3 used the sophisticated methods from the avoided cost proceeding to reflect the current and future needs for capacity, rather than rely upon the overly simple and outdated capacity method in the prior embedded cost studies. The embedded cost results indicate that the cost shift for residential customers would essentially be the same as estimated under the avoided cost framework, and that small general service customer generators would cause an annual cost shift somewhat smaller than the avoided cost-based estimates provided by Dominion.
Mr. Ori, witness Barnes in his rebuttal testimony argues that the cost shift is actually far lower than you estimated because of assumptions you made and data you used for your embedded cost analysis. Do you have a response?
So witness Barnes does have a point that it would have been preferable had I used total load instead of net load for allocating transmission capacity costs. However, given that transmission is less than 10% of the total embedded costs, I believed it was reasonable to use the net load for this exercise. Because of the small impact of transmission, even increasing the transmission benefits attributed to solar customer generators would still leave a large embedded cost of service cost shift under the current NEM tariffs, necessitating the need for a strong tariff redesign to protect non-participating customers going forward. Witness Barnes asserts on page 18 of his rebuttal testimony that the Commission should find that the embedded cost shift, even under current rates, is minimal to non-existent. This is not correct. Figure 6 of my direct testimony shows that a residential customer generator with a 3 kW solar installation would see about a $650 reduction in their annual bill from Dominion. I estimated that the corresponding embedded cost savings, however, would only be $147 per year. That leaves a $403 per year cost shift per solar installation. Even if we use the assertion of Witness Beach that half of solar capacity should count toward transmission capacity reductions, that would only be an additional $57 per year embedded cost of service cost savings. That would still leave an embedded cost shift for residential 3 kW customer generators of $346 per year per solar installation. This large remaining embedded cost shift is driven by the fact that only 4% of solar capacity contributes to a reduction in generation capacity need. That 4% finding from the 2019 Desk Avoided Cost Docket is based on sophisticated loss of load probability-based analyses of current and future customer demand and generator output and outages. In contrast, the current desk method used in their embedded cost study defines the production peak as occurring from 2 to 6 p.m. on the summer peak day, which would attribute a far larger peak reduction to solar than the 4% LOLP value. I use the 4% value rather than rely upon the solar output from 2 to 6 p.m. on the summer peak day because DESC has shown in the recent avoided cost proceedings that their system has changed from one that needs capacity in the summer to one that needs capacity in the winter mornings. I believe that the fact that this switch has not been made in the existing embedded cost studies is more a function of the typically pro forma nature of such studies, where the emphasis is on rate consistency, than on the merit of reflecting the need for winter capacity. Now, that said, it is critical for an embedded cost analysis of solar to reflect this reality. Finally, I note that even though DESC has not used LOLP values in its embedded cost studies, the appropriateness of using LOLP in embedded cost studies is recognized on page 39 of the NARUC Electric Utility Cost Allocation Manual. Thank you.
Does this conclude your testimony, Mr. Ori?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ori is available for questions from the other parties and the commission.
Alder Energy Systems.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Alder Energy has no questions for Mr. Ori.
Frank Knapp Jr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions for this witness.
Solar Energy Industries Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. CIA has no questions for this witness.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Upstate Forever.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no questions for this witness.
North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no questions for this witness.
Vote Solar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll break the trend. I have a few questions for this witness. Good morning, Mr. Ori. How are you today?
Good morning. Fine, thank you.
And very early for you, I would note.
Rather early.
So just very quickly, I want to talk a little bit about some of the discussions that we've heard throughout this proceeding. And I think you could help clarify. I want to talk about the net metering DER incentive and the cost recovery, and kind of how that interrelates or doesn't relate to avoided costs paid to generators. So let's first off and just start. Would you agree with me on the premise that South Carolina is fairly unique in how it recovers costs associated with customer generators?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And are you aware of any other jurisdiction that calculates a NEM DER incentive in this manner?
None come to mind.
Okay. And would you agree with me that in most states, net metering is not considered to be a purchase of electricity at retail rate?
I don't know if I would agree with that. I think if you talk to energy professionals, they'll realize that that's what NEM metering does, and depending, who you're talking to, they may characterize it that way, or they may not, depending on their individual interests. Certainly, the public probably doesn't think about it that way because they don't, really understand the details of it.
But as far as purchased power is normally treated, it would be passed through a utilities fuel adjustment or fuel clause. That's not done in most states for the retail credit that customers receive. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. And so it's really a unique function of South Carolina and the Act 236 settlement that was adopted, that any portion of that retail rate is in all passed through the fuel clause here. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I guess to the extent when you say sort of a portion of the retail rate, you're talking about that sort of remaining differential. Yes, I'd agree with that.
Right. And is it your understanding that the solar distributed energy resource value that's determined for net metering, that's not treated as a purchase of power, and that's not passed through the fuel clause? Is that your understanding?
I'm not sure, and I don't know if just the way the statement was made, but also point out that I really haven't been involved in the actual proceeding that's sort of dealing with the recovery of those costs. I've been involved in the proceedings to determine how to calculate that, but sort of a lot of the accounting details and the recovery details, I'm probably not the best witness for.
Sure, no, I could definitely appreciate that. So let me ask you. I asked Mr. Lawyer, were you present yesterday to hear Mr. Lawyer's testimony?
Yes, I was.
And I asked him that if the value of distributed energy resources was found to be higher than it is currently, that would mean there would be a lower DER NEM incentive recovered from other customers. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And so I think I asked him, you know, if the risk of undervaluing solar fell on ratepayers in that matter. Do you agree with that conclusion that it would?
Yeah, I believe I would agree with that conclusion for the existing, but I think going forward with the solar choice median tariffs, you know, that mechanism wouldn't be applied to that cost shift, so it wouldn't really apply there.
Right. Thank you for that's. I think that's a very important clarification. And are you aware in Act 62, the General Assembly specifically spoke to discontinuing that mechanism for new customers?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Okay. And do you have a hypothesis for why we're currently 6 years down the road from the settlement that was adopted that methodology, and there's still so many blank value categories?
I mean, part of it, I think, really is, you know, policy driven. For example, the environmental or the carbon related categories, you know, those wouldn't really apply if you don't have, you know, cap and trade. I mean, certainly there is a small amount of environmental costs that's sort of pulled out of the energy costs. The T&D piece, you know, I've had disputes with and discussions with the utility on that. A lot of that is driven by the way the utility does its planning practices. There are a lot of utilities where they actually incorporate the effects and forecasts of the effects of distributed energy resources in their planning, so they can actually attain cost savings by being able to defer T&D. But if that's not something that a planning department does as a normal course of business, then those benefits really, you know, aren't going to appear in the same way as it would for another utility. And so, you know, it could be valid for utilities to say they're zero. Also, you know, there are differences in what drive peaks and capacity need for different utilities. So there could be, you know, differences there. You know, a lot of the benefits we've seen for T&D capacity have been in summer peaking utilities where the peak's pretty predictable, driven by, you know, summer air conditioning needs. It might be more challenging in South Carolina because you have the dual peak, the winter and the summer peak. Those are the ones that immediately come to mind.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you for, I know this is kind of odd, sprung this on you. It's a big question to ask. Mr. Chairman, I would like to take judicial notice of Order 2015-194, which is referenced in Act 62 several places. And that order includes as an attachment the Act 236 settlement. And would just like to refer the witness to that if that's acceptable.
Notice taken.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to share my screen here briefly. Okay, and let me know when you see my screen being shared. I think we're still waiting. Okay.
I can see it now.
Okay, great. And I'm going to scroll up and to show this is Order Exhibit number 1 from Order number 2015-194. Now, see Section 1 says parties to this settlement agreement. You're seeing that with me?
Yes, I can.
And you would agree ORS was a party to this settlement?
Yes.
And just very briefly, I want to look at now in Section 2, Introduction and Preamble. I want to scroll down to number 3 and number 4. And would you mind reading number 3 and number 4 for me?
The solar parties take the position A, that due to environmental and other factors, if all inputs are fully quantified, the true value of solar would be such that each kilowatt hour of energy generated by a solar customer generator and intended primarily to offset part or all of a customer generator's own electrical use would be at least as valuable for rate-making purposes as a kilowatt-hour of power supplied to that customer from the utility grid. Parenthesis, one-to-one rate, and parenthesis, and B, that no charges specific to solar customer generators should be levied. 4, the solar parties, however, acknowledge that quantifying the value of certain benefits of solar power would be difficult and contentious at this time. In the interest of settlement, the solar parties are willing to agree to forego quantifying the value of certain benefits of solar power, so long as the one-to-one rate can be achieved.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Horry. And I think you read that much better than I would have, so thank you for providing some clarity. Now, would you agree that it is difficult to quantify a lot of these things, like the avoided T&D you mentioned?
Yes, it is difficult.
But it is possible?
It is possible, yes.
And would you agree with me that if avoided T&D were calculated currently, that would lower the amount of the DER-NIM incentive that's being collected from other ratepayers at this time?
Yeah, that's the way the mechanism would work, yes.
Okay. And
I'll also point out, though, that again, in looking at the T&D value for Dominion, I see that Witness Beach estimates a value of $155 per kW year for T&D, which I believe is 5 times as high as what the T&D value should be. I looked back at my generic docket work papers, and my value was under $30 a kW a year. So, there is care that needs to be taken in looking at T&D to make sure it is calculated correctly.
And you would agree in the generic docket, the commission has not yet issued an order on methodology and whether Act 236 methodology should be updated.
Yes, and I think it's unfortunate that that decision wasn't able to come out before this hearing, because for my testimony, for example, I was expecting, I guess wrongly, that the decision would be out so that any debates over the avoided cost could just be set aside, numbers could be updated appropriately to match the order. But because that hasn't happened, I think there's a lot of different numbers flying around in this case.
But would you agree with me that it's in the commission's hands at this point, if it were to update the methodology and require population of these value categories, that could have the impact of reducing the NIM DER incentive that's collected?
Well, it would both reduce the NIM DER incentive, and it would also reduce the cost shift estimates, or potentially reduce the cost shift estimates depending what the ruling is or the order is.
Mr. Horry, I appreciate you getting up very bright and very early. It's very good to speak with you today. Thank you for your testimony. And I have no further questions for this witness. Thank you.
Dominion Energy, South Carolina.
Good morning, Mr. Horry. My name is Chad Burgess. I represent Dominion Energy, South Carolina in this proceeding. It's good to see you again. How are you today?
Fine, Mr. Burgess.
And Mr. Horry, were you present in the virtual hearing room yesterday when CCO witness Eddie Moore testified?
I was.
And did you hear Mr. Moore testify under oath that he did not believe a cost shift currently exists?
I did.
And Mr. Horry, do you have your direct testimony handy?
Let's see. Yes, I do.
Would you please turn to page 6? And I'm going to direct your attention to line 18. Just let me know when you're there.
Okay, I'm there.
And your testimony reads at the end of line 18, in this way, the energy exports that are netted receive full retail rate bill reductions. Because the full retail rate is far larger than the avoided cost of value provided by those exports, this netting arrangement creates a large cost shift burden to non-solar customers. Did I read your testimony correctly, Mr. Horry?
Yes.
And just so it's clear for this commission, it's your sworn testimony that there is, in fact, a cost shift that exists today, correct?
Absolutely. Given the currently adopted avoided cost numbers, there is a very large cost shift today.
Thank you, Mr. Horry. I appreciate you answering my questions. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions of this witness.
Commissioner questions.
Chair Williams.
Commissioner Caston.
Good morning, Mr. Horry.
Good morning, Commissioner.
Mr. Ori, are you still with us?
I am. I'm sorry. Can you not hear me?
Yes, I heard you. I was actually looking for my paper.
Okay.
Through the course of this hearing, I've heard more than once. I know per Mr. Beach, earlier witness, why did ORS only look at cost and not also look at the benefits of solar?
Well, we did look at the benefits provided by solar because we did do, a balanced analysis of what the cost shift would be, and that looks at both the costs and benefits. I think what you might be referring to is the complaints that we've focused so much on the cost shift and not the preservation of the solar industry. And I think there, witness lawyers sort of addressed the fact that, it's ORS's role to really protect or look out for the consuming public. And in that role, the cost shift really is the most important sort of criteria for us to focus
on. Page 3 of your revised direct, you state that ORS does not object to the DESC proposal, DSC proposal, and the proposal being the solar metering tariffs, and provide 2 modifications to the proposed tariff rates to reduce cost shift. And I've seen those, but can you, again, briefly tell me what those 2 modifications provided?
Sure. So I guess first off, the Dominion proposal does a good job of reducing the cost shift, and especially the removal of the banking. I think that is the most logical thing to do. Why would you ever credit exports at full retail rates? That's really, I believe, an artifact of days when you couldn't tell the difference between exports and reduced consumption. So a utility was left with no other option but to do, banking and netting. But I think given the meters now and the fact that you can quantify what's an export versus just reductions of on-site consumption, you don't need to worry about that anymore. Now going on to my modification. So the first thing I saw in the Dominion rates is that the cost shift amount was much larger for smaller size solar installations than larger solar installations. And if you have my testimony out, you can see that on page 10, my figure 1. What I do there is I sort of calculate what I call my corrected cost shift, because there's a little sort of detail in the way that Dominion calculated their cost shift that I believe failed to show that there really was this effect of a large cost shift remaining. And my numbers are the orange circles and hollow triangles that remain under the desk rate. So, for the smaller customers, there's a big cost shift. For the bigger customers, they're actually paying a lot more because of that subscription fee. And so their cost shift goes down. But I personally was sort of uncomfortable with this sort of favoring of the small size solar installations over large size, and this large cost shift remaining for the smaller customers. So I wanted to sort of balance that out, make the cost shift, sort of the same across all size customers. So my reduction in the subscription fee does that, because the subscription fee, it's charged on a per kW size of the solar installation. So the bigger the solar installation, the bigger fee that the customer is experiencing. And it looked to me like that fee, based on cost causations, based on what it costs per kW to really provide transmission distribution services, was too high. And so I calculated a lower fee, and that had the effect of sort of removing this difference between the cost shift imposed by smaller solar customers versus larger solar customers. So that was sort of the first modification I did to kind of level that out. The second thing I did is I looked at the way they were designing their energy rates. And I saw that there was sort of an automatic cost shift built in to that calculation. And the reason that cost shift exists, and I apologize, this is all pretty technical stuff, but Dominion designs the rates based on hitting a certain revenue target, right? Based on this typical customer with this 3 kW system, let's subtract out the benefits of solar, and the remaining amount, that's how much we want to collect from the rate. So that's all fine. When they get to design the energy rate, they say, okay, we're going to collect a certain amount in BFCs, a certain amount from subscription fees. So let's take all that out. And what's remaining, we're going to collect through energy charges. So still, that's all fine. But what they do is they calculate that energy rate based on the energy usage of the customer prior to installing the solar, rather than the customer usage after installing solar. And so basically, they're calculating those rates using more kilowatt hours than they'll actually be able to bill. And so because of that, there's some automatic sort of cost shift sort of built into the rates because of that. Now, that may have all been intentional. That may have been because they were trying to come up with kind of a balance between eliminating all of the cost shift and providing enough bill savings to customers so the solar industry would continue. And perhaps even this larger cost shift for the smaller customers than the big customers, that could have been intentional as well, because if we think back about Witness Robinson's testimony, he said there's really not much of a payback period increase under their new rates for small customers. And that is indeed what I would expect, given there still remains a large cost shift for those small solar installations under the rate. So, I'm not saying that these are necessarily errors. These may have been intentional things done by Dominion in order to sort of strike a balance. But from ORS's perspective, if we want to sort of present to the commission, well, what would rates look like if you're really trying to get rid of all the cost shift you possibly could through rate design? What would those rates look like? And those are the ORS modified rates that we put before you. Now, I recognize that may be too extreme. You may not feel that you can really go to that full level of removing all the cost shift because of the sort of conflicting goals of not disrupting the solar industry. But I wanted the commission to be aware of what zero cost shift rates would really look like, partly to then understand that Dominion rates are kind of a compromise in between, and give a sense of, how much of a compromise or how much of a deviation from zero cost shift Dominion's rates really represent.
Mr. Ori, I think I almost understand what you just said. I want to make sure, at the risk of totally embarrassing myself on one of these, I want to I guess, to find what I think my understanding is of the subscription fee, since you brought that up. And the second item you had there about looking at it as though they didn't have solar makes sense. But as far as the subscription fee, and I think you say that it's based on the kilowatt size of the customer generator's solar installation, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so I was trying to figure, like, why does that matter? And does it matter because, are you saying that, in essence, Dominion is the solar customer's only customer, in essence? The solar generator can sell electricity to the solar generator only because they don't have the infrastructure in place to sell it to their neighbor or wheel it across town or whatever. So they are using Dominion's infrastructure. So is the subscription fee supposed to cover the cost of them using that infrastructure? Is that the point of based on the kilowatt size, or am I just absolutely totally misunderstanding this?
You know, Commissioner, I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but that's actually a really interesting perspective because, you know, the solar generators really are, you know, using the Dominion system to export power. And, you know, you could look at the subscription fee as representing that. You know, one of the complications is how much a customer is going to be exporting onto the Dominion system is a function of both the size of the solar array as well as the customer's own native usage, right? Because it's only the excess generation over the customer's own usage that actually gets exported. So, you know, and I think I say in my testimony, if these solar systems were all like just located in fields and there was no like customer load associated with them, then the subscription fee as done now, you know, could work. But I think the amount that the solar actually imposes on a system is actually going to be less than the panel amount because, you know, there's bound to be some native home usage that's going to offset some of that.
Well, I think that was a polite way of telling me that, no, that's not quite what I meant, but
no, I mean, I think I came at it from a different perspective. I think yours is totally valid as well. And I think it makes total sense. I was thinking about it more in terms of how much is the customer actually using the grid for their own needs. And you just sort of flip that around to how much is the customer using the grid for the export side. And, you know, and both of those are actually important.
Okay. And that does make sense. I understand what you're saying. I knew we'd get there. I'm slow sometimes, but we'll get there. Let me ask you this. I noticed I think on page 4 of your testimony, lines 9 through 34, let's see. Lines 9 through 11 on page 4, you mentioned determination of the successor solar choice metering tariffs. And this has been asked more than once. Is this hearing that we're having right now about a successor solar choice tariff?
You know, Commissioner, I have to admit that I did not sort of recognize sort of the importance or the significance of that term and the fact that there might be a difference. I've been assuming that this proceeding does apply to those terms or those conditions that are being discussed for this successor tariff. And I don't know if that's, a misinterpretation of the intent on my part.
Well, look, I'm not trying to hang you over it because I've heard it more than once too, and I'm trying to determine, okay, if this is the successor solar choice hearing, what was the original solar choice tariff? And in any event, I appreciate your honesty and candor. Thank you very much. On page 5, line 3, where you had referenced Act 62 also, in that particular line, ensuring access to generator options for customers who choose to enroll in customer generator programs. Does the DESC or the ORS proposal prevent ensuring access?
No, I don't think they prevent ensuring access at all. I think you have to keep in mind that in the solar industry, in the early days, there are a lot of problems dealing with issues such as, being able to just interconnect to the system. And so my reading of a term like access really applies to sort of barriers like that. It's not applying to what the cost is. Because regardless of what the cost is, someone will still be able to, install solar. It's just a matter of whether solar is worth enough to them to justify its cost versus the bill savings they're going to get.
Okay. And on page 6, lines 19 through 21 of your testimony, you say relative to DESC's plan to eliminate banking, you state because full retail rate is far larger than the avoided cost value, this netting arrangement creates a large cost shift burden for non-solar customers. And I know that's, been addressed or quoted, but I don't know if this is two questions or one. Is this also in part because solar energy is produced typically in non-peak times and energy used by solar customers usually during peak times, or is this in part because it doesn't, I guess, reduce all the solar customers' demands? It reduces it when the solar is being used. But in other words, the solar customer still uses the utility's grid generation. Is any one of those things I just said the reason or part of the reason why you say this? The netting arrangement creates a large cost shift burden for non-solar customers.
Well, yeah, I guess let me try to break that down. So the netting and banking, the difference between, the retail rates and the value of solar, that big difference just exists. Given the current approved avoided costs, there is this large gap. Now, you have, Witness Beach, who says that, well, there is no gap and that, avoided costs really should be 14 cents per kilowatt hour instead of 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. But those aren't the approved values. He inserts a lot of additional values in there that the commission is, neither approved yet, nor have, those values been vetted. I will point out that, we've had a lot of discussion in this case about sort of other jurisdictions where solar is cost effective, where the avoided costs of solar are actually larger than the retail rate. And I think this is a good opportunity to just point out that, every jurisdiction is different. And so you can't sort of assume that what's being done in one jurisdiction should be applicable at all to South Carolina. Some jurisdictions have much higher energy costs, so the avoided costs are higher. Some recognize sort of environmental costs and carbon adders because they're involved in cap and trade, for example. Some areas recognize T&D capacity costs, so that's another adder. Some may have different like fuel hedge requirements of the utility, so that could add another piece. But, a lot of it is also just, policy driven by the legislatures and by the commissions. And so it really is custom to what happens in that jurisdiction. So, I just want to put a warning out there that just because other jurisdictions are showing those results doesn't mean that necessarily applies to South Carolina. Okay, now my little sort of tangent aside, let's go back to your original question. So, given that in South Carolina, the avoided costs are very low, we have this large gap. And what happens is, if you size the solar system to never export, then there won't be a problem. So if you put in a small solar array where its maximum output isn't larger than the customer's maximum usage during the daytime, then there'd be no need for DN or banking. But traditionally, what the solar industry has done and what solar customer generators have done because of NEM banking rules is they've sized the systems much larger. They sized the systems to meet almost all of their demand, maybe 70%, 80% of their total annual usage. And because solar outputs the most during the daytime, and that's usually when the customers consume the least, you have this massive amount of export during the day period. And so removing banking, if you got rid of those rules, and if you are recognizing or compensating exports at the value of solar, like you do with PURPA power projects, systems are probably going to get sized much smaller. They're not going to be sized that large. They'll probably be sized larger than the customer's maximum daily, because some amount of exports is still worth it in order to get the larger retail savings from other solar output that can be consumed behind the meter, but it's likely going to be much smaller than the current systems.
Well, thank you. Two things you just mentioned that kind of generated some thoughts is because what you just said is what, I think I've heard and kind of come to sort through in that I originally didn't understand how they were sized, why they were sized. Not that I fully understand it now, but it seemed what I was hearing, and I think you just said, was that typically these systems are oversized for above, I guess, what it would generate during the day, and then oversized maybe what they would need even on a 24-hour period, which clearly at night they could not generate solar. So they're oversized with the intent or purpose to sell back at a retail rate to the utility. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's correct because, I don't know if it's most, probably most jurisdictions, they have kind of an annual netting. So you can be overproducing more than you could possibly use like in a summer month because you're going to sort of get credit for that come, the winter months. So it's not just sort of a day-to-day banking. I mean, this is sort of month-to-month banking that's happening in a lot of these cases.
Okay, so the intent of the solar choice metering tariff proposed by DESC and ORS, though different a little, is if there is going to be excess generated energy put back into the system, then the value of that being put back to the system, or the paying to the customer solar generator, needs to be at that reduced cost to remove that. Some say there's no cost shift, no subsidy, but so that others aren't paying for that retail rate that the solar generator's benefiting from. Is that correct?
Yes, I think it was witness Everett's testimony that said that if you look at the current total cost shift for NEM customers, about half of the cost shift is due just to the netting and banking. And so just removing netting and banking would get rid of half the cost shift. And then rate design changes, TOU rates, larger BFC, et cetera, that would, further reduce the cost shift. But, half of that cost shift is just due to the banking rules and the associated oversizing of solar systems because of that, incentive.
So if the solar generator chooses not to use the solar choice metering tariff and just provide energy for themselves during the production time, not put it back into the system, and when they aren't generating solar energy, simply pay the retail rate, their cost savings would be whatever energy that they do not take from the grid and they generate themselves, correct?
Almost. I mean, I pause just because you started the question saying if the customer doesn't use the solar choice metering tariff. And I guess I would just clarify that even if they are on the solar choice metering tariff, if they're not exporting, the benefits they're going to get for all of their solar generation is going to be a reduction at sort of the retail rate levels. There's not going to be any sort of lower compensation for any of their solar. It's all going to be at retail. I mean, it'll be at the solar choice metering tariff retail, but it will be at retail.
But if they weren't on the solar choice metering tariff, there would be no other fees, would there? Like a system, I mean, what do we call it? Subscription fee and such as that?
Okay, so I guess we're talking about a case where a customer could actually remain on current tariffs and not move to a solar metering tariff, solar choice metering tariff. I don't know if that's actually allowed. I thought all customers needed to move over, but let's say if that were the case and they could just stay on current tariffs, then yes, you're right. If they never exported onto the grid, all of their usage reductions would be at full retail, just like an energy efficiency customer, just like someone who, puts in insulation or puts in high efficiency light bulbs, puts in a new refrigerator that's more efficient. They're all reducing usage and they're all getting benefits at full retail rates. The way I like to think of it is what happens behind the meter is totally the customer's decision and purview, and they should get full retail rate savings for that.
And you mentioned energy efficiency, and I've heard that mentioned a few times too. And I've thought about that, and I'm not sure that if I'm hearing or understanding that we're calling, the solar energy efficient, because maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But, I think in terms of, my 20 SEER HVAC programmable variable speed fan unit, or my energy efficient refrigerator that's that way 24 hours a day, whether it's sunny or cloudy or night, which energy efficiency on that side of the meter matters 24 hours a day. So I had not viewed the solar that way, but is that considered energy efficiency or?
No, not at all. And this is a great question. So you're right. There's been a lot of discussion of energy efficiency. But energy efficiency and solar are very, very different because energy efficiency, basically the customer is just using less from what they otherwise would have. So the important thing is an efficient customer, a customer with a lot of energy efficiency versus an inefficient customer. If you look at their usage profiles, the pattern of their usage, they're basically still the same. They're still, probably going to be using the most in the mornings and in the evenings, somewhat less in the daytime. But if you just sort of looked at their shape, there wouldn't be a dramatic difference. And because of that, there's really no big cost difference in serving an efficient customer from an inefficient customer on a dollar per kilowatt hour basis, right? It's just like a slightly bigger customer, a slightly smaller customer. They're still very much the same residential or small general service customer. You put a solar system on, now you have a completely different looking customer shape. You've dramatically changed the customer shape. And, I think that's why we're in this proceeding, or part of the reason we're in this proceeding, to look at the cost shift, because those customer generators are so different that the standard, simple, residential retail rate, it's not really a good fit for them anymore. I think there's been discussion a little bit here and much more in the generic docket about the fact that simple rates are fine if all your customers are, homogeneous. If they all kind of look the same, you can get away with simple rates. To the extent customers are very different, then you need to have more complex rates. And that, I think about, that's why historically you've had simple rates for residential because they're all kind of homogeneous. And you had more complex rates for industrial customers because there are a lot of differences for industrial and large commercial customers. And you wanted to have rates that more reflected the cost for each of those customers. You don't want a lot of cross subsidization among different types of industrial customers or different types of commercial customers. Now, because of solar, we're sort of seeing that in the small general service and in the residential classes. Now we're seeing these very different types of customers, and it's just not sort of appropriate or adequate to have a simple, small basic charge and mostly flat energy charge, apply to these very different types of customers. You end up with these cross subsidies. That's that rate cost shift that Witness ever talked about. The 50% of the cost shift is due to, the rates just being too simple and not being a good fit for the customers.
Well, the good
news, but efficiency, you don't really have that problem because they still, they're pretty much the same with or without energy efficiency.
Well, thank you. And now, almost three. I think I got two more questions, maybe three. I'd heard, you'd mentioned other states too, and I've heard that mentioned too, and different comparisons and this kind of thing. I don't know if all the states were out west mentioned, looking at peak times, peak periods, or same in other states, maybe how they do this or rates. And in an industry I used to be in, there were also, those things were done too, but at least what I found, that one size does not fit all, and they are very regional. There water law rights out west here, we were riparian state. You had this rainfall, so you had just different conditions, that dictated probably how you do it. So all that said, while, I'd like to think South Carolina is unique in all the positive ways, I know that's not true either. But there are distinct differences, I think I heard you say, from state to state. I mean, while...
Absolutely.
And do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you re-raised that because, If you look at all those cost studies, they're really related to, well, what are, the policies and the rules in each individual jurisdiction. And to a certain extent, they're a function of who did the study, as well. So I think you need to, just be aware of that. And not feel pressured by what other jurisdictions are doing. Certainly it's useful to look at what other jurisdictions are doing to determine, well, is that applicable to South Carolina? Is that something that merits consideration in South Carolina? But ultimately, it's the it's the purview of the legislature and of you, the commission, to decide what should be counted in doing these kinds of studies.
I would also think even climate and geographic differences. In some states in the desert, it might be sunny 90% of the time. Some states, it might be cloudy 90% of the time. I don't know. There are differences.
Oh, very much so. If South Carolina were still a solely summer peaking state, if Dominion, if their problem were still 2 to 6 p.m. on a summer peak day, the cost shift would look very different. It'd be much smaller. But the reality is, the peak has shifted. And now that you have a predominantly winter morning peak issues, solar isn't as valuable for reducing the need for production capacity. And that's a big part of the reason why, the cost shift is so large in South Carolina. It's not that solar is a bad technology. It's not that it's, ineffective at producing energy. It's just you don't really get the energy when you need it to help your peak problem. You're not getting it at 7 or 8 in the morning in the winters.
I understand. Final question. Cost of service study, that's been mentioned more than once. How did you develop this cost of service study, and would a full cost of service study provide more accurate numbers? I mean, where did you get this?
Sure. So I developed my estimate of the embedded cost of service cost shift using Dominion's sort of latest embedded cost shift study. But I had to make certain simplifying assumptions because I didn't have either the time or all of the underlying data in order to do a full embedded cost of service study. But I did pick up the major changes or major impacts. And the big one really is what I referred to earlier with the fact that the need for production capacity isn't in the summer at midday anymore, but it's in the winter. And that's, that's been decided, many times by the commission already in the avoided cost proceedings. So I just leveraged those avoided cost orders. Those avoided cost orders say that solar, 4% of the capacity of the solar can count toward capacity reductions. So I use that 4% number as the value of production capacity provided by solar, and made a few other calculations for transmission and distribution as well. But that production capacity, that's really the big driver. So then I calculate, okay, given that, I'll assume 10% of the residential class goes solar. What do the costs look like now for that quote unquote solar residential subclass? I'll rebalance the costs so we get back to the same total embedded cost number, and then that's my cost shift.
Okay. Well, Mr. Horry, I thank you. You've been very patient in your answers, and you've been very gracious and not making my understanding sound so. You've been very gracious. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Let's take recess until 10:20. Good afternoon, or good morning, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina's hearing in docket number 2020-229 E. Oh my goodness. All right, so we're here in docket number 2020-229-E. And we are on commissioner questions with witness Ori. Let's take roll before we start back. In the hearing room, we have Commissioner Powers, Commissioner Caston, Vice Chair Belzer, Chairman Williams. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Williams and Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Powers, you have questions for this witness?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Ori, just a couple of questions. Of course, you know, the word that keeps popping up is we have to quantify all these different things. And I'm glad to hear that, you know, that what you're presenting to us is not all doom and gloom. And maybe I think I just want to ask you a couple things about numbers. Commissioner Caston proposed a situation where someone used power behind the meter and then got power when they couldn't produce it but did not export. Would there be a subscription fee in a situation like that you would impose?
Well, under the solar choice metering tariff, there still would be that minimum subscription fee based on the size of the solar
Would it be the same as someone who was exporting, or would it be less?
Well, it would be less because if you're exporting, you would have a larger solar array, you know, assuming it's the same underlying customer. So say instead of a 3 kW system, you have a 5 kW system in order to export. So you would be paying a higher subscription charge because of that.
What would be your opinion as far as the lifespan of a residential solar installation? We've heard different numbers. What would be your number?
You know, I'm not really the expert on that. I think it's in the 20 to 25 range. And unfortunately, I know that's the debate, whether it's 20 or 25. So I can't really add to that discussion, unfortunately.
And I think trying to understand your figure 1 that's on page 10 of your testimony that you talked a little bit about, you show the corrected residential with the little triangles. What do you see as the ideal size for a corrected residential system?
Commissioner, are you asking the ideal like KW size?
Yes.
Okay. So I think the proposed Dominion rates, the ideal size would be, you know, on the lower end. You know, maybe it's not 3, but maybe it's in like the 3 to 5 range for a customer, because that's going to provide the best bill savings for them. Now, I guess I should caution that all of these estimates are based on a certain size, a certain typical residential customer. So if you're actually a larger residential customer, then you could actually put in a larger solar array and still see the same kinds of savings, and you'd still impose the same kind of cost shift, because it's really the relationship of the size of the solar to the size of the customer's starting load. But, you know, to try to keep things simple, we just, you know, stuck with that typical residential underlying customer shape for everything. But certainly it makes more sense. Actually, you know, I think it's probably better if I can refer you to, let's see, my figure 6 on page, let's see, 23. and you'll see a better example of how the economics look for a customer.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so what I'm showing here is the savings per kW of solar. So I've normalized it so it's we can look at it across a wide range of solar sizes. And the top line shows the customer savings. It's around $200 per kW of solar under the current tariffs. It's pretty flat. You'll see that bottom orange triangle. That's the RS modified rates, and you'll see it's it's much more, so maybe $55 a kW in savings for solar customers. And the blue line in between is the Dominion proposal. And so you'll see the smaller the solar size, the bigger the customer savings per kW of solar, which shows that it's definitely in the customer's interest to do the smaller sized solar array under Dominion's proposal. If they do the larger array, then they're getting much closer to having no cost shift, much closer to the ORS modified rates. And so for a customer, definitely they want to do a smaller system, which sort of has interesting trade-offs. Obviously ORS would prefer if there weren't any cost shift, but to the extent we do need to maintain a cost shift in order to maintain the solar industry, having that cost shift apply to or incent smaller systems is certainly better to non-participants, because there'll just be less cost shift because the size of the arrays are smaller. So it's sort of an interesting incentive that's been set up by that Dominion rate.
Well, looking at both of those charts, both the figure 1 and 6, it looks like 9 kilowatts it's a good one if you can afford. Of course, the bigger the system, the more the cost. Correct.
The bigger the system, the more the cost. But if you look at my figure 6, the bill savings, like let's say an 8 kW system would get, it looks like it's only $60 to $70 per kW. So that's very small compared to if they shrank that down to a 3 kW system. They're going to see $150 per kW in savings. So a much better incentive for the customer to put in the smaller size system than the larger size system. Now, there may be other environmental reasons and personal reasons why they want to put in a larger system, but that decision to go with a larger system isn't going to be driven by the bill savings. It's going to be driven by other factors.
When you testified back in October, you talked a good bit about indirect cost and benefits and about the environmental aspects of all this. And I don't know, that's a hard part for us and for anyone to quantify, is it not?
It is. I mean, it is difficult.
One more question. What to you would be the ideal export rate?
So to me, the ideal export rate would be close to the current avoided costs. I mean, it would certainly be based on the avoided costs. I think there are probably some small additions that are worth adding to that avoided cost rate. I think it's worth looking more closely at T&D to see if it is reasonable to include a T&D component to avoid a cost, especially if you're looking at behind the meter solar, because that really is located on your distribution system and could have impacts in reducing the need for local distribution and transmission depending upon when those systems are peaking. If the need for those systems is driven by the same hours where solar is generating, then it's a good match and there's a benefit there, and that should be recognized. There may be some additional loss savings that may need to be added in, and this was all discussed in the generic docket. And then if the commission decides there are other avoided cost components that should be included, then those should be included as well. But I think at a minimum, the T&D and the losses.
So but you're not giving me a number. You're not quantifying that in answering that question. I'm just asking. I'm not.
Oh, you know, my guess is, let's see, if you're you know, the current number is what, around 3.5 cents, maybe including T&D and the other piece would bump you up to maybe 4.5, would be my rough estimate.
My only other thing, and it's more of a comment, is I could not help but when you and Commissioner Caston were talking, I could not help but think about energy efficiency. And in my case, I woke up last night about 12:30 and went around and cut off all the lights my son left on. That's my behind the meter.
That's right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any more commissioner questions for Mr. Orty?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. So is my sound doing okay? Sometimes I get complaints about the feedback, I believe it is.
We hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So Mr. Orty, I appreciate you helping me understand some of these concepts a little bit better. So let me ask you this. You are looking at this strictly from the ORS perspective in terms of trying to completely eliminate the cost shift. And that's just fine. But if instead you were hired by this commission to help us understand how to make a decision that brings balance to the needs and or desires of all of the parties, including the General Assembly, what would you be telling us? How would you advise us to select the most balanced outcome? What would be the most important 2 or 3 actions that we should take to bring balance to our decision?
I was worried I might get a question like that. So, you know, I think if we look at what sort of options are currently before the commission, you know, we have the RS modified, we have the Dominion, and we have the joint solar parties. I feel like the joint solar parties doesn't go anywhere near sort of close enough to reducing the cost shift. Witness Beach talks about, I think, an 8% reduction, and you know that's not anywhere near what we're seeing as the cost shift gap. So I would set that one aside. The ORS modified, if I were in your shoes, yeah, I mean that's probably too extreme. You'd probably get, you know, the protests of the solar industry. You might get some symbolic, you know, closing of storefronts or whatever, or you know, things in the trade press about solar, you know, pulling out of the state, et cetera, like, you know, they did in Nevada. So that leaves us sort of with the Dominion, and, you know, are there modifications that are necessary to make the Dominion proposal reasonable, or is that close enough? One of the things I think needs to be considered is just the whole timing with the generic docket. So one issue is, should the generic docket decide that there are additional, you know, cost components that need to be included, then it would be nice if those components could be included in these rates, and, you know, adjustments and recalculation of the rates could be made to reflect that, because I would expect any sort of adoptions out of the generic docket would increase the avoided cost, which means the cost shift would be smaller, which means the rates would also come down a little bit. So that's sort of one concern. If timing wise that could be accomplished, I think that would be a good thing. Next thing I think I'd look at is, you know, I made some recommendations as changes to Dominion's rates, you know, the 2 modifications. The second one, my TOU sort of rate adjustment, that one, for you, well, problem with that one is it's explicitly designed to reduce the cost shift. And if you're thinking we need to maintain some cost shift in order to sustain the solar industry, then maybe that's not something you do, because that sort of moves you away from being able to find whatever sort of midpoint that you as the commission are comfortable with. So then we're left with the Dominion rate and my suggestion to reduce the subscription charge. I still think reducing the subscription charge makes sense from sort of an analytical and a theoretical basis. The one thing though is if you do that and the rates are rebalanced, if you look at my figure 6, when I show how right now there's a big bill savings for the smaller customers and a smaller savings for the larger customers, changing my subscription or changing the subscription fee is going to flatten that out quite a bit. So it wouldn't be as attractive for small customers. It'd be more attractive for large customers, which, is great if you're going to lower the cost shift down to 0. But if you're going to leave some cost shift in, maybe that's not such a good thing, because maybe now you're going to be incenting the larger installations, which are actually going to make the total cost shift, worse. So maybe what Dominion's done is, regardless of how they got there, isn't such a bad thing. If you need to have a cost shift, it's probably better to have the cost shift for smaller installation sizes. So you minimize the total cost shift that you're going to see from customers. Again, our ORS obviously would desire for there to be no cost shift. But I think the commission believes there needs to be some cost shift maintained in order to prevent disruption of the solar industry. Then I think the Dominion proposal is actually not bad.
Okay, very good. That I find that very helpful. I appreciate it. That's all I have.
Any more questions for this witness? Mr. Ori, I have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
Would it be accurate to say that you were asked to focus on eliminating the cost shift by ORS?
Yes, that would be accurate.
Okay. Would you be surprised to find that subject to check in your direct rebuttal or direct testimony, revised direct testimony, that is, that the phrase cost shift was used 167 times?
That's a lot, but I would agree subject to check.
Okay. And would you agree that subject to check that the word benefits was used 49 times?
I'd agree subject to check.
Okay. Would you also agree that the commission is required to establish a solar choice metering requirement that fairly allocates cost and benefits?
Yes.
Okay. So could you tell me, you've spoke a lot about the cost shifts, but could you tell me all the benefits of solar that you considered in your analysis?
Sure. So my analysis really there's two analyses. There's the rate work that was based on the Dominion avoided cost-based cost shift analysis. And those benefits are, my understanding is that they're currently adopted avoided cost benefits for Dominion. So that would be, basically the energy and the generation capacity benefits provided by solar. On the embedded cost shift study, I looked at the energy benefits, the production capacity benefits, transmission capacity benefits and distribution capacity benefits. And losses are embedded in those as well.
Do any of those benefits speak to the elimination or at least the reduction for the company to build new generation capacity with more solar on the grid?
So the reduction in the need for generation capacity, that's explicitly picked up by the avoided cost proceeding numbers. So that's the perfect fit for that. On the embedded cost side, it's actually looking at allocating historical costs. So it actually doesn't sort of incorporate any forecast of future capacity need. But that said, what I did is I used the LLP numbers from the avoided cost proceeding that reflect how much solar would reduce the need for adding new capacity. So I tried to reflect that in the embedded cost study by doing that.
Okay. Did you consider the reduction in carbon emissions as a benefit?
No, I did not. And that's based on my participation in avoided cost hearings where, it's quite clear that that's not, at least currently, a cost recognized in South Carolina, so I did include that.
Well, I'm not necessarily referring to the cost, but do you believe that less carbon emission is beneficial?
Okay, yeah, I sorry, when I said cost, I should have said avoided costs. My apologies for that. So as to your question on whether there is a benefit in reducing carbon, yes, I believe there is. There's certainly societal benefits, and depending on your jurisdiction, there may also be monetary benefits. But my understanding is in South Carolina, that hasn't been recognized as an avoided cost component because there isn't that direct link between carbon emissions and actual utility costs at this point.
So your testimony is that Act 62 only directs the commission to assess benefits that have been assigned a monetary amount?
No, I don't want to make that statement. I'm just saying that, it's in the commission's purview to decide what should count in avoided cost, and what has previously been ordered is that those environmental costs or any environmental costs for carbon not be counted in avoided costs. That doesn't mean that the commission should feel restricted from, changing that as part of the generic docket. But just since that hasn't happened, I just stuck with Dominion stuck with the adopted avoided cost, and I felt that was reasonable for this proceeding to do that as well.
Thank you for that. So with the commission's requirement pursuant to Act 62 to fairly allocate cost and benefits, if reduction in carbon emissions is a benefit, wouldn't it be fair for solar users to benefit from the benefit they provide to the non-solar users?
Yeah, absolutely. If the decision made that carbon reduction should be counted as a benefit, then the Dominion rate should be recalculated, because by including that as a benefit, the cost savings from solar become larger, the cost shift becomes smaller, and the solar choice metering tariffs would reduce as well.
Okay. I have another hypothetical for you, because I learn best through analogy, and I want to really understand how solar energy used behind the meter impacts non-solar users. So this is a hypothetical. I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon. But let's just say hypothetically that a new battery storage system is launched or brought to market. Is so advanced that some would consider it alien technology for what it's able to do, to the point where it can reduce a solar user's energy to the point where they don't really need to use the utility's energy. Obviously, this is a hypothetical. Would that create a cost shift?
Let's see. So assume in your scenario, the customer isn't using the grid at all. They're basically able to self-supply with the combination of their solar and storage, in which case, they're not exporting. So we don't have that cost shift component. The question then becomes sort of and I guess they're paying, well, under current rates, they'd be paying zero because they wouldn't have any energy usage. Under the solar choice metering tariffs, let's see, they would be paying a subscription fee for their solar and a basic facility charge, but no energy charge. So we sort of know the payment side of the equation. I guess the question now is, well, what's the cost? So if the utility needs to sort of stand by and provide energy to that customer, should that alien technology break down, then there is a cost to the utility to provide that. And so, a basic facility charge and a subscription charge, maybe that is, the right amount, maybe not. So I guess any cost shift would kind of depend on what that difference is. If those are the right amount, then it's perfect and you're fine. If the basic facility charge and subscription charge are overcharging, then you actually have the opposite problem, that you're charging that customer more than you should. And if they're too low, if the burden placed on the utility to have all of this infrastructure in place on the chance that a customer might need it, if that cost is actually higher than the BFC and the subscription fee, then there could be a small cost shift.
Thank you for that. And with that analysis, I like the way you work through that problem. I like your order of proof there. It really sends the message that no matter how much solar you deploy, no matter what battery system, if you're able to afford it, you're able to install, as long as you're connected to the grid, there's some cost somewhere to serve that solar user, whether they're paying for it directly or it's being shifted to a non-solar user. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that's a good conclusion or summary, yes.
So whenever we hear someone say, solar energy is free or it comes from the sun and there's no need to pay for it, that may be true in theory, but it's not true in practice. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, if they're connected to the grid, the utility has an obligation to be provider of last resort and, provide power to them. So they're always going to be that cost. Now, if they're off in the woods, not connected, then obviously that's a different situation.
Right. And we're always going to be at odd ends when there's a question as to what is the true benefit, whether it's indirect, direct, social, or monetary benefit of solar. Is that right?
Yes, I think the monetary ones, though they can be controversial, they're a little easier. It's the social ones that are particularly hard, and those are the ones I think are driven really more by sort of policy intent and policy goals. But those can definitely be difficult as well.
And I'm glad you.
More difficult.
I'm sorry, sir. Continue.
Oh, I was just going to say actually more difficult than the monetary benefits.
And I'm glad you said that, because it seems to me if we don't find a way to value the societal benefits of solar, we're taking the easy way out. Would you agree with that?
Well, I don't know if I'd say you're taking the easy way out. I think you're just taking a different path. Certainly, if you want to promote solar, if that's the desire of the commission, then it's consistent to adopt sort of more of these benefits and looking at the value of solar. If you want to keep it more on a monetary basis and have solar just be compensated for what solar provides and not provide any subsidies to solar customer generators because of some goal to promote it beyond the pure economics, then I think it's fine to take that path as well. Neither one is necessarily wrong. They're just different paths for different reasons.
In your reading of Act 62, do you see a difference made between direct benefits, monetary benefits, and societal benefits?
I don't recall any difference like that. I felt like the legislation was sufficiently sort of vague in the wording to allow different parties to read it in different ways.
And so if the legislation includes the word benefits, then in your opinion, the benefits are not restrictive to the monetary benefits based on how you interpret the statute.
Correct. I think it's the purview of the commission to determine what those benefits are, and they can be monetary and non-monetary benefits.
Okay. You mentioned the generic docket in your testimony. I believe is 2019-182E. Do you remember testifying about that docket?
Yes.
Okay. If I understand you correctly, you would have wanted, in an ideal world or a perfect world, you would have wanted the commission to issue an order in that docket before proceeding with this docket. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that would have made things a little clearer, or maybe just not had as many sort of conflicting benefit numbers thrown around.
Can you tell me in an itemized or numerical list what that order would have allowed you to do that you were unable to do in this docket?
Sure. So what it would have allowed was sort of a calculation of the avoided cost and benefits. And that calculation has happened in this docket already. It's just using the currently adopted avoided cost numbers. Had the order come out that said, okay, this is the new set of avoided costs, these are the components that are going to be included, then it would have allowed Dominion to recalculate their cost shift numbers and calculate new rates, and for all the parties to similarly sort of adjust their testimonies if necessary to reflect those avoided costs. Now, depending on what the timing is, there still could have been debate over what the value of some of those, new categories would be. So maybe it wouldn't have been a perfectly smooth docket, but it would have just sort of narrowed the uncertainties down quite a bit, I think.
How long do you think it would take to make those calculations?
Let's see. I mean, I would think it'd be a matter of a few weeks for numbers to be updated by parties, provided that sort of there's enough in the order so it's clear, what the numbers should be. Unfortunately, I don't think, well, I'm trying to think back to generic docket. If the parties all provide enough information where the commission could not only rule on methodology, but rule on values. I think in a lot of cases, the commission would only be able to rule on methodology, but there wouldn't be the information in the record to support a specific value. So that, unfortunately, would probably be, I would guess several months to iron that out.
Okay. So just so that I'm clear on what you're saying, you're not saying that without the order you couldn't conduct your various analyses. You're just saying it would have made it easier.
Yes, that's right. And so right now I think there's, some uncertainty about, what that future cost shift might be. But to the extent that, the commission thinks that additional components are going to be adopted in the generic docket, I think that gives you basis for deciding that, accepting a rate in this case that has some cost shift in it, as currently calculated, is reasonable, because that cost shift amount, the expectations is actually going to be smaller, when recalculated using, the numbers that finally come out of the generic docket.
Mr. Ori, it's a pleasure seeing you again. Thank you for joining us so early to provide your testimony. I have no further questions for you, and I'm going to ask if there's any redirect.
Chairman Williams.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is Commissioner Williams.
Oh, Commissioner Williams has some questions for you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I had my system on double mute, so I wasn't able to respond quickly enough. Good morning, Witness Lori.
Good morning.
Your endurance and your being here to help us understand this material. I want to focus on the subscription fee for a couple of minutes and ask about the appropriateness of defining, and for you to remind me of the reason for defining the subscription fee cost based on the size of the system rather than the use associated with it.
Yeah, my preference actually would have been if a demand charge were used instead of a subscription fee. So it was really a direct measure of either the customer's maximum draw from the grid or maximum export onto the grid. But a subscription charge does kind of a similar thing. It's just not as precise. You have to make this assumption of the solar array size being a reasonable sort of metric to use for the charge.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that reflects on the next question I was going to ask in a hypothetical. If you've got a commercial customer that uses 250 kilowatts and they install a 50 kilowatt solar array, how is that any different from the same use of that customer if they install a smaller solar system? And they're, I think, under the proposed subscription fee, they're paying the same amount, but their usage is different. And I think you just called that a demand charge as an alternative to a subscription fee. Do I have that right?
I'm sorry, can you give me your two example customers again?
Sure. I'm just saying if somebody is on average is a 250 kilowatt customer and you've got one customer that installs a 50 kilowatt solar array, and you have another customer that installs a 30 kilowatt solar array, is there a difference in the cost to service them that should be reflected in the subscription fee?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So, one of the issues is how much does or do the solar arrays reduce the customer's maximum demand on the utility? if the solar output coincides perfectly with when the customers both have their maximum demands, then the cost to serve the customer with the 50 kW system should actually be lower than the cost to serve the 30 kW, because now the one will have a 200 kW max demand and the other would have a 220 kW max demand. So that's why a demand charge is preferable, because you're really reflecting, well, what's the net impact of the customer.
Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate that. That's helpful. I want to look for a few minutes at your figure 6 on page 23. And where you look at the impact of the various proposals. And as I've done a few times, kind of go back to the E3 report from 2018 and just the general principle of gradualism. How is, for a new customer that maybe is thinking about installing solar, how does this reflect those principles of gradually making the cost adjustments?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that, because gradualism has come up several times in this proceeding. And, I think it's really being either misinterpreted or misapplied here. Gradualism really is important for existing customers on existing tariffs and how you're changing those existing tariffs. I don't think it really applies to a customer making a decision to go on a different tariff, because they can always remain on their current tariff. It's just like when a utility introduces a new optional, let's say, time of use rate. Gradualism isn't a concern there, because that's just an option for the customer. They can choose to take it or they can choose not to. Now here, it's certainly a bit different, because the customer isn't necessarily choosing to go on this rate, but they would have to go on this rate if we put on the solar. But it's still their decision to install the solar or not. So I don't think the requirement for gradualism really needs to be a strong concern here. I think the concern is more, the market disruption concern. Perhaps there's a concern for customers rolling off the existing tariff and then having to be put onto this tariff. But that's, many years out when that grandfathering on the older tariffs would end and they'd be able to move over. I'm not sure of how the sort of the timing of how many customers have installed when, and whether that sort of runway period is long enough for customers to have recovered their investment. But I anticipate if there are problems there, that could be something that can be resolved later, and doesn't necessarily need to hold up the decision for what the solar choice metering tariff should be right now.
Thank you. And you mentioned time of use rates, and also from the E3 report, there's some reference to rates should be simple, stable, understandable, acceptable to the public, and easily administered. And that's not literally a correlation to what I'm about to ask, but I found it intriguing, the idea of using the time of use rate 5 that's already in existence. Did your analysis involve looking at that, the cost shift of the time of use rate 5, if that were to be used instead of the new proposed time of use for solar choice customers?
Commissioner, I didn't look at that in detail, because I saw what the total bill change would be and just realized that this rate wasn't going to come close to providing enough cost shift. But during the proceedings when that's come up, I've looked at the rate 5, and it does have the nice aspect of it is time of use, but its periods just aren't aligned as well to reflect solar output as the Dominion proposal is. It would really provide, much larger bill savings to solar customers than the Dominion rates. And, I don't think it's really a good reflection of what the current Dominion sort of system needs are. One of the problems with time of use rates is, because of the gradualism concerns, because of the rate stability concerns, once you set up a TOU rate, the utility is pretty reluctant to change that, change the time of use periods. You don't want to confuse your customers. You don't want to, get all these calls in your customer service department, don't want to get all these complaints. So you kind of keep to what has been used in the past, even if that isn't kind of a great fit. I mean, even in California, for years and years after we knew we had a problem where a peak was not in the summer midday anymore. Peaks were now in the evenings. We still had time of use rates with peaks, from noon to 6. And that's just because that's what had been installed, decades earlier. And, people didn't want to rock the boat on it. So it's hard to make changes onto rates that you already have, lots of customers participating on.
And so that last comment reflected the idea of you wouldn't want to change or did that reflect that you wouldn't want to change the current time of use rates and peaking time frames?
Yeah, so you wouldn't necessarily want the solar proceeding to force a change in other rate schedules.
Okay. Thank you for this, Lori. I really appreciate it. Good talking to you.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions.
Commissioner Caston.
Mr. Horry, I sort of asked you this before, but Commissioner Williams kind of got me thinking about it again. If a solar customer does not put energy back into the grid and uses energy only to offset their usage and just use the utilities energy when the solar is ineffective, how does this affect the utility if the solar customer stays on just the residential rate? They just simply use it to reduce their bill.
Okay, so yes, this is a little bit different from Chairman Williams' scenario where you had, the alien technology. So this is just a simple case of like a customer putting in a smaller size solar system, so they reduce their own consumption but never export it. So that's better in terms of you don't have that export problem. You still, though, are going to have this problem of the usage shape of this customer is going to look very different from a normal residential customer because chances are the peak demand of that customer, so the capacity you need to have available serving that customer probably isn't much different from what it was before they installed the solar. So under current NEM rates, you're going to be giving them kind of a bill reduction based on them reducing their capacity needs by some average amount. And in fact, they aren't reducing their capacity needs by hardly any. So you're still going to be over compensating, so over discounting that customer because the flat current rates can't separate between the cost of energy and the cost of capacity. It just blends it all together into one flat rate, so they're getting a capacity discount for every kilowatt hour that the solar provides, whereas that solar really isn't providing that capacity reduction. So that's the rate design problem with simple rates. And so, yeah, even in that situation, it's not as much of a problem, but there still is a cost share problem with the current rates.
Then would it make more sense to simply just view the residential rooftop or maybe some of the smaller commercial or whatever as just simply a separate rate class?
I think it would, and I've suggested that to several clients that that is a way to isolate the cost shift problem, a way to assign costs to this group of customers based on their very unique customer characteristics. When you think about rate design, you have these customer classes, and the real intent of the customer classes is to have a group that's sort of readily identifiable and that are kind of homogenous within the class. And we don't have that with the solar customers. They are very different. So it makes sense to break them out as a separate class, from a cost allocation from a rate making perspective. But politically, it's difficult because, right now the solar in most jurisdictions, enjoys the cost shift, subsidy. And once you break them out, it's going to be much harder for them to, retain a subsidy like that. So, it would be a tough fight for utility to do that.
When you say politically as in real politics politically, or that there are going to be customer groups that are, well, I guess all things lead to that is what you're implying.
Yeah, I think politically more in terms of the lobbying action at the legislature, because, to be frank, we've seen a lot of cases where the commissions have come up with decisions that we've agreed with, that we think make economic sense, only to see those overturned at the legislature, due, we think, to, lobbying efforts.
So, in your opinion, should the Public Service Commission make decisions that are we think are in the best interest of all the customers, or that we think are politically expedient?
Oh, I think they should be based on all customers, but I think that the political aspect is a reason why a lot of utilities stay away when trying to make sort of that bold a recommendation to go to the separate subclass. In fact, I've had clients just tell me, it makes sense, but we just can't go there. We just don't think we just don't see this making it through.
Nicely done. Thank you, Mr. Ori.
Thank you.
Any more commissioner questions? Hearing none, redirect.
Briefly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ori, ORS has made two recommendations to Dominion's proposal for the commission to consider, correct? A reduction in the subscription fee to align with the cost causation, better align with cost causation, and modification to the time of use energy charges.
That is correct.
Is that right? Okay, nothing further. Thank you, Mr. Ori.
All right, Mr. Ori, you can step down from the witness stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, it is now time for closing arguments. Let's come back at 11:30 for closing arguments and hopefully finish by the end of the day. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're back at the Public Service Commission of South Carolina's hearing in docket number 2020-229-E. Let's take roll. Here in the commission hearing room, we have Commissioners Powers, Caston, Vice Chair Belzer, and Chair Williams. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Williams and Commissioner Thomas. It is now time for closing statements. My instructions to the parties for closing statements is that you limit your closing to 5 minutes. 5 minutes. With the number of parties we have, we should be finished in 30 minutes. All right. So let's start from the top with Alder Energy's Systems.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Chairman Williams and Commissioners, we really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you directly. Alder Energy asks that you enter an order for non-residential customer generators requiring one-to-one net metering with annual netting and without penal fixed fees that have no bearing on costs to serve. We recognize that your charge in this proceeding is not an easy one. However, evidence has been presented to make such a ruling under Act 62. Dominion notes that ORS's position more aggressively eliminates any cost shift and presents that as evidence that Dominion's tariff is middle ground. There is nothing moderate about Dominion's solar choice tariff. Mr. Zimmerman testified on behalf of Alder Energy and told you without equivocation that Dominion's solar choice tariff will end new non-residential customer generation and desk territory. Dominion chose to present this commission with the very Nevada decision many commissioners acknowledged they wish to avoid. Any suggestion that ORS's proposal is the outlier in this proceeding is Dominion's attempt to move the goalposts established by Act 62. If this commission finds that a cost shift exists from customer generation at all, it must also see that non-residential distributed generation is a different animal. Dominion witness Robinson admits non-residential customer generation is a, quote, niche market. With respect to Mr. Robinson's sunny projections for non-residential customer generation, the commission should ask why Dominion hired Guidehouse to prepare a beautiful 29-page report on the state of customer generation, but did not require Guidehouse to update that report after publishing its solar choice tariff. Mr. Robinson's report offers apples under Act 236 economics, but asks the commission to compare that to oranges under solar choice tariff economics. Why would Dominion not provide the commission more transparency in its assessment of the statutory mandate to continue investment in distributed generation? Dominion witnesses Robinson and Rooks admit in this proceeding that medium and large commercial and industrial customers do not present a cost shift at all. That is a troubling revelation. Dominion witness Rooks does not dispute that some manufacturing facilities and other large load customers are subject to Dominion's small general service solar choice tariff. Remember that the tariff includes Dominion's non-residential rate schedules 3, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 22, and 28. That is to say, the solar choice tariff casts a wide net and captures the very medium and large commercial and industrial customers that Dominion admits do not present a cost shift. Given the time constraints that we've recently heard, I'm going to try to speed this up. Commissioners, if you remember one thing from my brief time with you today, I asked that it be 3 words, 28 cents. Dominion witness Rooks could not have been more clear. The burden on other commercial and industrial ratepayers from customer generation is a mere $333,000 annually, or 28 cents per monthly bill. If I appear dismissive of that number, I do come by it honestly. Commercial and industrial energy bills often exceed $1,000 per month, and some exceed literally millions of dollars per year. 28 cents represents far less than 0.1% of a non-residential customer's bill with $1,000 monthly outlay. Mr. Robinson's testimony instructs the commission why this number is so low. the penetration of non-residential distributed generation compared to the rate class is simply trivial. There isn't enough distributed generation to create a cost shift within the rate class. Chairman Williams raises very legitimate concerns about low-income ratepayers coming to the commission and complaining about higher energy prices. These concerns are certainly legitimate, but have little bearing on non-residential customer generation. The South Carolina Energy Users Committee has intervened in 9 rate-related cases since 2019 before the commission, including some relative to solar, but is notably absent here and from the generic docket. The commission should consider whether the committee's absence from this proceeding is an expression from its members that they are not concerned about 28 cents. Finally, as of today, 46 South Carolinians have registered to talk to the Public Service Commission at the public hearing scheduled for March 23rd. When the commission writes its order, it should consider whether any of those participants that show up are non-residential customers coming to complain about 28 cents. To some, Dominion's tariff will kill an entire market to cover far less than 0.1% of a non-residential customer with a $1,000 bill. On this ground and others, the commission should find that Dominion's proposal is penal and violates Act 62 as applied to non-residential customers. Instead, the commission should continue to permit one-to-one net metering with annual netting and without penal fixed fees until such time as a witness can come into a commission proceeding and present a material cost shift for non-residential solar. 2 more short points and I will conclude. Dominion witness Cassis admits that renewable energy certificates attributable to behind the meter consumption of non-residential customer generation should remain with the customer. The commission's order should therefore require Dominion to provide customer-owned RECs and require that they stay with the customer unless they are purchased by the utility. Second, Commissioner Belser wisely points to disparate language in the Energy Freedom Act with respect to solar choice metering and a successor solar choice metering tariff. Alder believes this language gives the commission the ability to disregard cost to serve issues in this proceeding. However, Alder quite pointedly would balance that and recognize that other parties have spent a great deal of time and money to retain expensive experts to come to the commission and testify about that very issue. So respectfully, Commissioner Belser, Alder Energy would defer to those other parties on that issue. It has been a pleasure to be with you this last week. I express on behalf of myself and Mr. Zimmerman our sincere appreciation for your attention and your consideration. Your decision will have a significant consequence on Alder Energy and its customers. Thank you very much, Chairman Williams.
You're welcome. Frank Knapp, Jr.
Commissioner, thank you very much. And I want to thank you and all the commissioners for allowing me to participate in this hearing. Commissioners, this docket comes down to answering 2 critical questions. Is cost shift occurring? And if so, how much are residential and small commercial customers subsidizing the solar customers in their respective classes? Mr. Rooks gave Dominion Energy's estimate of cost shift. Residential non-solar customers are paying $1.38 more a month to subsidize Dominion Energy South Carolina residential solar customers. Small business non-solar customers are paying 28 cents more a month to subsidize Dominion Energy South Carolina small business solar customers. But Mr. Rooks went on to admit that should the commission approve the company's solar choice tariff, the non-solar residential and small commercial customers will not now see any financial benefit. They won't see any financial benefit even in the current Dominion General Rate Docket in front of the commission. It won't be until the next Dominion General Rate hearing years from now before there might be any financial benefit. We also determined that residential and small commercial customers are not paying higher utility bills today to subsidize solar customers. Mr. Rooks' estimate of $1.38 and 28 cents cost shift won't materialize until years down the road in a future docket if a solar tariff doesn't see some change before then. Or it might not even materialize then, because frankly, we have no idea what will happen in the energy field before then. So let's be clear. Low-income customers are not paying $1.38 more a month to subsidize solar customers. There are no non-solar residential customers paying $1.38 a month to subsidize solar customers. No small business is paying 28 cents more a month to subsidize solar customers. The Commission should acknowledge that today and for years to come, the dreaded cost shift doesn't exist, and then move on to the clearly stated intent of Act 62. The first stated legislative intent is to build on the deployment of solar generating capacity by reducing regulatory and administrative burden to customer installation and utilization of on-site distributed energy resources. Commissioners, burden to me equates to cost. Clearly, the solar choice tariff will reduce the savings, thus increase the cost on existing and future customer installation and utilization of rooftop solar. The second stated legislative intent is to avoid disruption to the growing market for customer scale distributed energy resources. Witnesses have shown conclusively that the South Carolina solar rooftop market is not a healthy, growing market. And as someone who has been in the advertising business since 1991, I can tell you that when you cut the benefit of a product by around 60%, and that product is very pricey, the sales of that product are going to drop significantly. That is the future of the solar market under the solar choice tariff. It will be greatly disrupted, and we will lose the reputable solar companies in our state. And then finally, we get to the third legislative intent, an intent that is framed by the first two unequivocal legislative intents. That intent is to establish a solar choice metering requirement that fairly allocates costs and benefits to eliminate cost shift or subsidization to the greatest extent practical. Commissioners, I am not an attorney, but I can read the plain language of the law and, importantly, the order of the stated intents of the legislature. There is a reason that addressing any potential cost shift was listed third by the legislature. The first two intents did not hedge on what the legislature wanted in the commission's decision. Only until we get to the legislative intent number 3 do we see concern for cost shift. Yes, the intent is to eliminate it to the greatest extent practical. But cost shift doesn't exist today. Dominion's witnesses admit as much. So what should the commission do? The legislature did direct you to establish a tariff by June 1st. Given what we know today, information that the legislature did not have when it passed Act 62, I would recommend two options. First, you could opt to keep the present solar metering program as the new tariff. Establish a new docket to further examine what minor changes might be a good idea, even if there is no cost shift now. And finally, instruct all the parties to work together to develop a consensus proposal that correctly assesses costs and benefits. Or you could simply adopt Witness Beach's joint solar choice tariff that does the best job of meeting the intent of Act 62. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this important docket, and I hope that I have contributed constructively to the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Knapp, for participating. I don't believe Solar Energy Industries Association wanted to close, but correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to leave anyone out.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. Solar Energy Industries Association would cede any of our time to the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and associated parties.
Okay, thank you, sir. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Upstate Forever. 5 minutes is the time limit. I appreciate Solar Energy Industries Association for yielding its time, but we're going to limit it to about 5 minutes. Is that okay, Attorney Mixon?
I will try my best, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Thank you. I guess in the interest of time, we would maybe ask to address the question about the statutory interpretation question from Commissioner Belzer for post-hearing briefing. But, our position is, as Mr. Moore stated yesterday, that we believe the commission is directed to consider all of the factors laid out in section F2 and G1, and we'll explain that further in a post-hearing brief. Now, with that in mind, when the General Assembly passed the EFA, it did so with the explicit intent of building upon the successful deployment of solar, enabling investment in DERs, and reducing burdens to rooftop solar customers. Dominion's proposed solar choice tariff, far from building or enabling, instead is designed to all but eliminate a viable cost-saving option for its customers. The chief thing that its proposed tariff reduces is the ability of solar customers to lower their utility bills. Both Dominion and ORS's proposals in this docket clearly violate the EFA by focusing on the few words of Act 62 related to cost shift while disregarding many other governing provisions and the explicit intent of the legislature. Dominion keeps describing their proposal in this proceeding as a compromise or as a middle ground. That is, to be frank, absurd. Both ORS and Dominion's proposals fail to satisfy the EFA. Both will make solar entirely uneconomic in Dominion's territory, and both make no sense under common sense principles of rate design. As an initial matter, both ORS and Dominion have continuously stated that there is a cost shift that currently exists. To set the record straight, until and unless this commission approves rate changes in a later rate case, a decision that will involve considering and balancing many different factors, solar customers under the new tariff will have no impact on non-solar customers' bills. And their entire basis for cost shift is illogical because their definition is that cost shift is customer bill savings. The amount that a solar customer saves on their bills minus PURPA avoided costs that were approved in a different proceeding, that forms the entire basis of their definition of cost shift. Commissioners, you're going to hear from Dominion in a little while that this cost shift exists now and that it is a real and pressing problem. Unless this commission accepts the bill savings are automatically considered a cost shift to other customers, it just is not true. Eliminating solar customers' ability to save money on their bills cannot be the intent of Act 62, and it's not a good definition of cost shift. There can be no shift of cost to other customers until those costs are identified by the utility and approved as part of a rate increase. The Commission has oversight of those steps, and they have tools to protect customers at each of those steps. But we're not talking about kicking a potential problem down the road for another day. Taking into account the existing framework for valuing the benefits of rooftop solar, there is not a net cost to other ratepayers. To make their claims about cost shift, Dominion and ORS have chosen to minimize or simply ignore the benefits of solar that actually reduce the utility's costs in the long run, like its ability to reduce summer peak, reduce the utility's transmission and distribution costs. And those benefits accrue from both customers behind the meter usage and from solar exports. Witness Horry made a recommendation in the generic docket about how to quantify avoided T&D costs, but for some reason he did not include that value in his estimate of cost shift in this proceeding. Had ORS or Dominion taken the time to fairly calculate those benefits, and they had 2 years after the passage of the EFA to do so, it would have shown that rooftop solar saves all customers money, not just at some hypothetical point in the future, but right now. Put simply, rooftop solar is a win-win. Neither Dominion or ORS has actually done their homework to determine whether or not solar customers are paying their fair share. ORS Witness Horry's study of solar customers used entirely different assumptions than Dominion used in its own embedded cost of service study. His recommendation here is that rates just for solar customers be set on a totally different set of assumptions than about what it costs for Dominion to serve its customers. He admitted on the stand that he wouldn't even recommend that the commission adopt his own proposal. Between that and the fact that ORS's calculation of cost shift doesn't include their own recommendations from the generic docket, ORS's proposal must be set aside. It's understandable why Dominion would try to minimize the benefits of solar. They have an incentive to keep these values at zero. For current NEM customers, keeping these benefits at valued at zero keeps the amount they collect through the DER NEM incentive artificially high. And for customers who would sign up under the new tariff, it lets them claim that there is some huge cost shift that justifies steep fixed fees and subscription charges on solar customers. It's much less clear why ORS has not tried to quantify these benefits and has instead assumed that eliminating customer savings from rooftop solar is in the public interest. And even more, their proposals just don't make sense under common sense principles of rate design. Dominion's proposal encourages the wasteful use of electricity. Under their proposal, the only customers who can save money by installing solar panels are big energy users who install small PV systems. It could even create a perverse incentive for customers who use a lot of energy to install the smallest solar system possible just so they can get a lower volumetric rate for most of the year. And unfortunately, ORS's proposal would make solar uneconomic even to those customers. Both of their proposals advocate for several dramatic changes to net metering that will take place all at once. If Dominion were to say that they were going to double their electric rates 5 years from today, that would not comport with the principle of gradualism, and neither does their proposal here. Dominion and ORS's proposal unfairly single out solar customers so that they are not allowed to receive bill savings from their behind the meter usage. Customers who switch to, for instance, gas for home heating, who install energy efficiency measures, they will continue to get bill savings for their reduced usage, but not solar customers. Our joint solar choice proposal strikes an appropriate balance between the competing objectives of Act 62, is cost effective, and is the only proposal before you today that has tried to quantify the benefits of solar to the system. It makes sense now and it makes sense in the future. And for those reasons, we urge the Commission to reject Dominion and ORS's positions in this proceeding and adopt joint solar choice tariff proposed by nonprofit interveners, including our clients. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Mixon. And also, North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association did not want to make a closing statement, closing argument.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Vote solar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to present this argument to you. I want to start by saying Act 62 does not mandate a certain number of megawatts be adopted here, and no party has said as much. There's no requirement to ensure that the solar market thrives no matter what. Rather, as at least one commissioner has observed, the intent for the commission here, this seems in line with the kind of Hippocratic oath of first do no harm. Now, it's true the General Assembly could have dictated exactly what comes next, but it chose to defer to the Commission's institutional expertise and judgment to make a more precise, data-driven, and conservative adjustment that the General Assembly itself was not in a position to make. And I think the diligence of a physician is apt in this case. Act 62 first requires the Commission at the threshold to do a thorough examination, consider multiple analyses, before ultimately making a diagnosis of whether the cost and benefits are aligned or skewed in some way. Then the Commission must utilize this information to design any policy treatment with careful precision to make sure it's avoiding disrupting the market. If the Commission feels uncertain of whether it has enough data to truly make a sound diagnosis here, the do no harm principle counsels caution in dispensing any remedy. This is akin to gradualism. Now, in addition to incomplete information, the Commission is justified to tread lightly for the first time through the text of this statute. As Vice Chair Belzer has identified, there are plain language issues with sections F and G. The law imprecisely alternates between the phrase a solar choice metering tariff and successor solar choice metering tariff. raising questions as to whether those things are the same thing or substantively different. Now, while there are interesting arguments in either direction, no amount of acrobatics can overcome what is plainly stated in the legislative intent of Chapter 40, Section A3. In addition to the do no harm prongs of 1 and 2, the third prong manifests the legislature's specific intent to undertake this job with an informed judgment. The third prong of legislative intent starts with a directive. That applies to the entirety of Chapter 40. It states that it is the General Assembly's intent to, quote, require the Commission to establish solar choice metering requirements that fairly allocate the cost and benefits to eliminate any cost shift to the greatest extent practicable. And I paraphrase just at the end to shorten. The term requirements here is broad and includes tariffs. It includes cost-benefit analysis. It includes solar valuation methodologies. It is the sum of those requirements that are intended to do the work of fairly allocating the cost and benefit to eliminate any subsidization to the greatest extent practicable. The General Assembly's intent to require this action in a certain manner is more than aspirational language. In this way, I see subsection A3 as a roadmap for how to apply the law to effectuate the intent throughout Chapter 40. The phrasing of A3 suggests this is a two-step approach, as I discussed earlier. First, use the diligence to diagnose whether there's a problem, and then and only then set out to treat it. On the front end, the Commission has discretion. It must fairly allocate the cost and benefits. This speaks to the heavy analytical lifting to identify the cost and benefits, and then to use the Commission's judgment to fairly allocate those quantities. This is the diagnosis part. Do the cost outweigh the benefits? Who bears the burdens? Who enjoys the benefits? And only if a problem is diagnosed, after doing this process of fairly allocating, can the Commission have the sure footing it needs to adjust rates to address the problem proportionally. On the back end, the Commission uses these fairly allocated costs and benefits in its discretion to eliminate any cost shift or subsidization associated with net metering to the greatest extent practicable. Here, the Commission has the discretion and authority from the General Assembly to right-size the treatment to meet its primary directive. The Commission may do this to the greatest extent practicable or feasible based on the record it has before it, while balancing the prime directive of first, do no harm. But the phrase cost and benefits cannot just casually be thrown around to give any meaning parties prefer. Chapter 40 uses the phrase cost and benefits in 4 places, and it is reasonable to read the same language of cost and benefit to mean the same thing in the same section of code. The General Assembly must have intended the Commission to utilize the cost and benefit analyses provided in Section D to reflect what it will consider in regards to cost and benefits. Relying solely on avoided cost determinations under the old Act 236 settlement framework is wholly inadequate to meet this new statutory requirement. Now, as multiple witnesses have acknowledged, the company has failed to even attempt to perform several of the analyses described in Section D, like the solar service cost of service study, long-run marginal cost analysis of transmission and distribution, and quantification of economic impacts. The inclusion of economic benefits in Section D stands out as a manifestation of the intent to avoid disrupting the market, further reinforcing the do no harm prong. Now, the Commission is left on its own to seek out or now require the analyses it needs to fulfill under the law. And in interest of time, I will cut to the chase. I ask you here to reject the proposals by ORS and Dominion, and to give special consideration to how the Joint Clean Energy Party's proposal put forward by Witness Beach could be leveraged at a minimum as an interim proposal while the data deficiencies identified in this docket are remedied. I thank you for your consideration and appreciate the opportunity to appear before you. It truly has been a privilege.
Thank you, sir, for participating. Dominion Energy, South Carolina.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. And I'm Chad Burgess on behalf of Dominion Energy, and I want to tell you how much I appreciate and thank you for your time to present the company's case. And I also want to thank opposing counsel for their representation of their respective clients, as well as the input that Mr. Frank Knapp has provided to you in this matter. And I want to begin by telling you what this case is not about. And throughout this proceeding, I've listened to the rooftop solar advocates attempt to convince you that this case is about lost revenues impacting Dominion Energy's bottom line. It's not, and I wouldn't fall for that. There is no new revenue being generated as a result of this proceeding. This proceeding is about cost shifting. In other words, who pays? And to be clear, this proceeding is not and has never been about costs that are shifted from the customer to Dominion Energy. Rather, these costs are simply shifted from one customer to another. In other words, Dominion Energy will recover these costs in either scenario, but the cost shift determines from which group of customers they are recovered. For energy being exported to the grid, customers are paying for that cost today. It shows up on their bill every month in a line item called Renewable Energy Resources and is recovered through the company's fuel rates. With that background, Dominion Energy proposed the Solar Choice Tariffs at the direction of Act 62, which requires the Commission to establish a new net energy metering program called Solar Choice. The General Assembly took great care when writing Act 62 to direct the Commission to establish a Solar Choice program which fairly allocates costs and benefits to eliminate cost shift to the greatest extent practicable. The intent of Act 62 was fulfilled in part when the Commission held a hearing in the generic docket to investigate and determine the costs and benefits of existing net energy metering programs. During the 3 days of hearing in that generic docket, the Commission heard testimony regarding the impact of rooftop solar programs on all customers, especially low-income customers. And specifically, the Commission heard testimony that lower-income customers are least likely to adopt rooftop solar, but are also the hardest hit by cost shifts from participating rooftop customers. The information obtained by the Commission in that generic docket serves as part of the careful data-driven analysis required by Act 62's directive to fairly allocate costs and benefits so as to eliminate any cost shift or subsidization associated with net metering to the greatest extent practicable. With these principles in mind, Dominion Energy engaged the expert experience of Guidehouse, a national energy consulting firm with experience in jurisdictions across the country, to provide assistance with the rate design for the Solar Choice program in compliance with Act 62. As a result, Dominion Energy has presented to this Commission a solar choice tariffs that eliminate about 75% of the cost shift, and according to ORS, utilize the hallmarks of rate design elements and comply with Act 62. Even then, ORS believes Dominion Energy could have gone further than 75% to eliminate the cost shift. Nevertheless, Dominion Energy, through its witnesses, proved that the proposed solar choice tariffs comply with the requirements of Act 62 because the tariffs permit solar choice customer generators to use customer-generated energy behind the meter without penalty, while eliminating any cost shift or subsidization associated with net energy metering to the greatest extent practicable, and at the same time honoring the intent of the statute as is expressed in subsections A1, A2, and A3. On the other end of the spectrum, from ORS, the rooftop installers claim that a bleak future for rooftop solar is on the horizon in South Carolina unless this Commission provides policy solutions in the form of subsidies to their industry, a desire that violates the General Assembly's plain language in Act 62. The General Assembly knew that the cost shift was embedded in the netting arrangement, which is precisely why they instructed the Commission to eliminate the cost shift and call it a solar choice metering tariff. However, the suggestions that the rooftop solar industry can only survive with the support of continued subsidies is a claim that is simply unsupported by data, studies, or analysis. On the other hand, the record reflects that the company's data, its analysis, and its studies, in other words, the company's evidence, clearly shows that Dominion Energy solar choice tariffs will allow rooftop adoption to continue while also more accurately aligning costs and benefits in accordance with Act 62. And more importantly, the solar choice tariffs will advance rooftop solar in South Carolina without doing so at the expense of non-participating customers, which is especially important to low-income customers who are particularly affected by any cost shift. There will be an immediate benefit that inures to the approximately 740,000 non-net energy metering customers of Dominion Energy via the significant decrease in the costs that are being added to the tab of non-net energy metering customers as a result of the current subsidies being paid to net energy metering customers. And on the other hand, existing net metering customers will not be affected by these tariffs until 2026 at the earliest. Thus, the phrase solar choice. These customers will have a choice as to how they want to proceed. Therefore, make no mistake, these solar choice tariffs not only comply with the Act, but also represent a benefit that inures to almost 750,000 of Dominion Energy's customers. As such, the company respectfully requests that the commission approve the tariffs as presented by the company. Now, Mr. Chairman, I realize that I'm over my time by about 40 seconds, but I did want to address Commissioner Belzer's concern that she asked us to address in the hearing. And if I may have a minute and a half to do that, I would greatly appreciate it. During Commissioner Caston's questioning of witness Rooks regarding the meaning of successor tariff in 58-40-20 F2 and whether F2 applies to this proceeding, Mr. Gissendaner attempted to address this matter for the company despite not having time to fully consider the entire statute, its legislative history, and the question presented. Mr. Gissendaner stated that the company's position was that the term successor tariff in F2 applied to tariffs considered in any future proceeding rather than the solar choice tariffs presented in this proceeding. Commissioner Belzer acknowledged this reading, but then questioned whether subsection G applied to this proceeding because it also used the term successor tariff. Commissioner Belzer requested that all parties be prepared to address this issue during its closing statements. In response to Commissioner Belzer's statement regarding the use of the word successor in G, the company has reviewed the statute as well as the legislative history, and based on that review, it is clear that the legislature intended both F2 and G to apply to this proceeding, and I do not believe that interpretation is in dispute among the parties in this proceeding. Under well-settled South Carolina law, the goal of statutory construction is to harmonize conflicting statutes whenever possible, and to prevent an interpretation that would lead to a result that is plainly absurd. The initial draft of Act 62, dated January 17, 2019, as shown on scstatehouse.gov, demonstrates that an initial draft of the statute referred to a successor net energy metering tariff. And you may remember Mr. Moore's testimony on that point. That strongly suggests that the use of the word successor was meant to apply to this proceeding, and that the tariff proposed here is a successor to the existing net metering tariff. However, when the legislature removed the references to net energy metering and replaced those words with solar choice, they failed to remove the word successor, which no longer makes sense in the context of this proceeding and the final language of Act 62. To hold that F2 and G do not apply to this proceeding would lead to absurd results in violation of the rules of statutory construction that I just referenced. For example, if we assume G does not apply to this proceeding, then the company could develop a tariff that penalizes customers for consuming energy behind the meter that could also achieve elimination of cost shift to the greatest extent practicable, given that the cost shift language also appears in A3. And likewise, if F2 and G did not apply here, then the company would be allowed to file for a new net metering tariff immediately after the approval of the tariff in this proceeding, but in that proceeding, F2 and G would apply. The above examples reflect the absurd results that would occur if one were to limit this proceeding only to F1. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the additional time. And Commissioners, I appreciate your time. And again, I thank opposing counsel for the arguments that they've made on behalf of their respective clients. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
You're welcome. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. During this proceeding, a question arose about the applicability of 58-40-20 G1. And that section references a successor solar choice metering tariff and directs the Commission to eliminate any cost shift to the greatest extent practicable on customers who do not have customer-sided generation, while also ensuring access to customer generator options for customers who choose to enroll in customer generator programs. While ORS does agree that it is a little unclear as to whether successor means post-Act 236 or after the tariff currently being discussed in this proceeding, ORS believes it is immaterial due to the language in section 58-40-20A3. And that statute directs in part that it is the intent of the General Assembly to require this Commission to establish solar choice metering requirements that fairly allocate costs and benefits to eliminate any cost shift or subsidization associated with net metering to the greatest extent practicable. It is based on this language found in section A3, along with ORS's statutory duty to represent the public interest, that formulated ORS's recommendations in this proceeding as presented through witnesses Robert Lawyer and Brian Orey. ORS's duty is to look out for all of Dominion's South Carolina customers, including their 740,000 non-solar customers, many of whom have a hard time paying their monthly electric bills. ORS respectfully asks that this commission follow the directive of the General Assembly as stated in the statute and fairly consider and balance the interests of all of Dominion's customers and not just the interests of its 11,000 customers with solar generation and those of the solar industry. Appreciate your time and attention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, proposed orders are due close of business April 5th. We're in recess until 9 a.m. March 23rd. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Chairman Williams, may I address a very brief housekeeping matter? Commissioner Williams asked for a late file exhibit from Mulder relative to some of its production to Dominion Energy, and I would just like confirmation of which exhibit number was reserved for that.
All right, give us 1 second.
Thank you, sir.
It looks like, I believe it was 8.
That's what I had in my notes. I just wanted to confirm, so that sounds right. Thank you.
Attorney Spear, what do you remember whether or not the exhibit was to be filed under seal?
That was Chairman Williams' order, correct?
Okay, so then it would be exhibit 10.
Thank you.
Not 8. 10, not 8.
Thank you,
All
sir.
right. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.